Bonjour et bienvenue à cette conférence de presse concernant les feux de
Welcome
forêt
to this
2023.
press conference
Welcome on this
concerning
press conference
forest
on the 2023 wildfire season. Minister, whenever you're ready, you can go.
This conference is being recorded. Cette conférence est enregistrée.
Thank you very much. I guess we are now ready to begin. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous. I would like to just begin by acknowledging that I am joining you from North Vancouver, which is on the traditional territories of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. Earlier today, Natural Resources Canada scientists released an updated wildfire forecasting, which I will touch on in my remarks. Les projections indiquent un risque persistant d'activité de feu supérieur à la normale dans le centre du Canada en septembre, de l'est de l'Alberta jusqu'au centre de l'Ontario. I would also note that fires may continue to smolder in British Columbia and in the Northwest Territories over the coming weeks. Indeed, despite the arrival of cooler night temperatures and decreases in lightning activity in the fall, ongoing warm and dry weather may contribute to new fire starts, and there remains a likelihood that some existing fires may continue to be active through September and possibly later into autumn or even winter. Le gouvernement fédéral continue de soutenir les Canadiens et les communautés à risque tout au long de la saison de feux de forêt cette année et pour les saisons à venir. Earlier this summer, I announced that under the federal government's $28 million Fighting and Managing Wildfires in a Changing Climate Program training fund, we have signed agreements with 10 pilot projects with Indigenous communities, as well as with the International Association of Firefighters, to help train up to 630 additional firefighters and 125 Indigenous fire guardians all across Canada this year alone. En outre, au cours des dernières années, le Canada s'est concentré sur la préparation des futures saisons de feux de forêt et plus de la réponse aux incendies lorsqu'ils se produisent. Cela comprend des investissements à long terme pour s'adapter aux feux de forêt et en atténuer les effets, ainsi que pour surveiller et modéliser les risques d'incendie au Canada. NRCan has invested $170 million in our Wildfire satellite mission, which will be the world's first purpose-built public satellite system for monitoring fires. Additionally, the federal government is supporting the Fire Smart program, which is, as you know, a comprehensive program for identifying and preventing and mitigating wildfire-urban interface fire risks by providing actionable guidance for individual homeowners and for communities, enabling real measures that will make a practical difference. Tout en continuant à investir dans notre capacité de lutte contre les incendies et dans d'autres solutions à long terme, nous aidons également davantage les communautés à risque à accéder aux outils dont elles ont besoin pour se protéger et subvenir à leurs besoins. To this end, today I am pleased to be able to provide a bit more in the way of details on the 6 agreements that we have signed so far with our provincial and territorial partners through the Fighting and Managing Wildfires in a Changing Climate Program Equipment Fund. Through this fund, NRCan is making $256 million available over 5 years to provinces and territories to procure life-saving wildland firefighting equipment and essential personnel. To date, Alberta, British Columbia, Nova Scotia, Saskatchewan, Northwest Territories, and Yukon have accessed this fund this year, and we expect all jurisdictions to participate next year. This funding has been and will continue to support and strengthen these provincial and territorial governments' fire management capabilities, and it will allow them to procure the resources they need to fight wildfires of the scale and the severity that we have seen this year going forward, including vehicles, mobile units, avionics upgrades, hoses, pumps, and communications equipment. In particular, today, I am pleased to announce that in the last few days, we have finalized agreements with both British Columbia and with Northwest Territories, through which BC will receive $32 million and over $28 million will be provided to Northwest Territories over the next 5 years. This federal funding will be supplemented by provincial and territorial contributions. I certainly want to thank my British Columbia and Northwest Territories counterparts for their leadership over what has been a very, very challenging past several weeks. Before I turn things over to Minister Sajjan, I want to just say a few words about the big picture here. Wildfires have always occurred in Canada, but what is new is their frequency and their intensity. And the science is clear. The root cause of this is climate change. Un nouvel article scientifique auquel les scientifiques de Ressources naturelles Canada ont contribué a montré que le changement climatique a multiplié par deux la probabilité que les feux de forêt intenses que nous avons connus au Québec au début de l'année se produisent et que c'est à cause du changement climatique que ces feux ont été plus intenses et plus dangereux. There is a simple fact that government's first priorities must be to protect Canadians' lives and livelihoods. And increasingly, this starts with accepting the scientific reality of climate change and taking thoughtful, impactful action to address it, not simply burying our heads in the sand and hoping for the best. All of this is why, as Pierre Poilievre and his party gather in Quebec City over the next few days for their convention, I expect the country will be watching to see if they maintain the head in the sand approach on both the environment and on the economy, or whether they will finally get serious about the actions we must take to build a sustainable and prosperous future. But I will tell you, I am not holding my breath. It is no secret that since Mr. Poilievre became the leader of the Conservative Party, the words climate change have barely passed his lips. At a time when we have seen over 16.5 million hectares of this country burned and thousands of people evacuated this summer, we have not seen a single serious proposal from Mr. Poilievre or his party about how to address climate change, build a strong low-carbon economy, and of course, adapt to and mitigate the effects of wildfires and other natural disaster. This is not leadership. As Canadians continue to experience the worst wildfire season in our history, folks across this country deserve better. Going forward, the federal government will continue to work with provinces, territories, Indigenous communities, and all Canadians to fight fires this season, to prepare for future fire seasons, and address a key root cause of the intense and dangerous wildfires we have seen over the past few months, namely climate change. Thank you very much for joining us today. Merci beaucoup, and I will now turn things over to Minister Sajjan.
Thank you very much. Before I begin, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm here in Ottawa on the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And right now, 1,052 wildfires are burning, with 791 fires designated as out of control. Now, there have been 6,174 wildfires nationally this year, and approximately 16.5 million hectares of our beautiful country that has already burned. And in my home province of British Columbia and in the Northwest Territories, the last few weeks have been extremely difficult for Canadians. Community members have been forced to flee their homes for safety, not knowing if their homes will still be there when they return. Thankfully, in Yellowknife, thousands of people are beginning to return home after 3 long weeks. And to those affected, please know that we stand with you. We continue to mobilize resources across the country, and we will be there through the recovery and into the rebuild. I also like to speak directly to the firefighters, Canadian Armed Forces members, and our emergency management personnel on the front lines of this climate crisis, protecting communities across our country. I want to thank you for your service. And I also want to take a moment here to thank all the international firefighters who came to assist our effort. Canadians, to assist our efforts from many different countries. We all know that Canadians deserve leaders who aren't afraid to face climate change in our country. These wildfires have filled our air with smoke and turned our skies red. And this is a reality, and it is happening now. Canadians can't afford to look away. But Pierre Poilievre can, because he wants to fan the flames of division instead, distract with rhetoric and dog whistle language. Because the leader of the Conservative Party has no plan to fight climate change. It is as simple as that. But the climate crisis is here, and it is at our doorstep, and I've met the Canadians who are having to deal with this, and it's our home that are at risk. And literally, we will not look away from our communities when these type of disasters strike. We will be there to assist them. And we will not stop taking action to address the major challenge that climate change poses to our countries that require national solutions. Because we know how important it is to have the right resources when and where they are needed. We have some of the best wildfire fighting capabilities in the world right here in Canada. But the increased severity and unpredictability of wildfires due to climate change requires us to bolster bolster our preparedness even further. And that's why today's announcement from Minister Wilkinson is so important, especially in the midst of Canada's worst wildfires season on record. On August 25th, I approved a request for assistance from the Government of British Columbia to provide additional firefighting resources. Now, this is on top of the federal support already provided through the August 19 request. In addition, on August 12th, I approved a request for federal assistance from the Government of Northwest Territories. Multiple government departments are coordinating to provide assistance with both frontline and recovery efforts. Fisheries and Oceans Canada, along with the Canadian Coast Guard, have provided personnel trained in the Incident Command System to both British Columbia and the Northwest Territories. The RCMP are actively patrolling communities and supporting evacuations in British Columbia, and of course the Canadian Armed Forces have deployed on numerous occasions. And in British Columbia, immediately following the request for assistance, the Canadian Armed Forces sent a reconnaissance team to Kelowna to work with and provide advice to Emergency Management BC. The Vernon Cadet Training Center was made available immediately to provincial authorities, and approximately 175 CAF personnel are deployed right now in British Columbia to support firefighting efforts in the Vanderhoof and Mackenzie's areas. And also in the Northwest Territories, at its peak, the Canadian Armed Forces assistance included 350 deployed members, as well as air support and also local ranger support. The Air Task Force assisted with evacuation of approximately 430 people and personnel, and the Land Task Force assisted with firefighting in and around Yellowknife and also in Hay River. Now, the military was also crucial in supporting the territorial officials with planning and coordination of this unprecedented evacuation. And as always, Public Safety Canada, the Government Operations Centre, on behalf of Government of Canada, is leading the overall federal response coordination across the country. So we are leaving no stone unturned, taking a whole of government approach to making sure that all necessary resources are made available. And that's exactly what is taking place now. So while there are some positive signs of the major wildfires being held, hot and dry conditions continue to pose a risk in many areas. Even once the fires are considered contained, dealing with their aftermath is no easy task. So I want to underscore that when the wildfires stop burning, we will be there to support all Canadians during the rebuild as well. Thank you, and I will turn it over to Minister Heidi.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Les incendies des forêts ont
The forest
été
fires have been
dévastateurs pour la Première
devastating
Nation
for
de la
First
Colombie-Britannique,
Nations in British
des
Columbia
territoires de
and
Nord-Ouest
Northwest
et
Territories
pour
and
l'ensemble du
across
Canada.
Canada.
Nous sommes en contact avec
We
les
are in
communautés
contact with the
affectées afin
affected
de leur
communities
apporter
to
le
provide
soutien
them with necessary
nécessaire.
supports.
Since the start of 2023 wildfire season, more than 90 First Nations and 26,500 individuals have been impacted by wildfires. And the Emergency Management Program through Indigenous Services Canada has provided over $113 million to support a range of services and supports, including accommodations, transportation, food access, mental wellness, and key needs for all of the affected communities and individuals. We know that we'll need to continue to be there working together in partnerships with the provinces and territories to ensure that people have what they need during these tremendously difficult times. The realities, as my colleagues have spoken about, of climate change means that wildfires and other natural disasters have become more frequent and more severe and more prolonged in recent years. And often it's First Nations communities that are on the front lines. We've seen impacts all across the country, even in regions that are not experiencing fire, but through, for example, the effects of heavy smoke leading to health concerns and needs to evacuate related to incredibly smoky conditions, for example, in Saskatchewan. Through our team, the Government of Canada remains in contact with chiefs and councils and first responders. I personally have spoken to many chiefs over the summer and in the early months of the summer to ensure that communities have what they need, that they feel supported, that they are supported, and that they know who to turn to if answers are not forthcoming quickly. Indigenous Services Canada, as I said, is providing all the support necessary for evacuations and for the supports for communities as they contribute to the incredible effort to protect their communities, and will cover all the eligible costs associated. We will also be there to help communities as they plan the returns to their communities and begin to assess the damage and understand how best to move forward. I'd like to thank all of the First Nations first responders and firefighters, of which there are many across the country, contributing their incredible talent and knowledge to this effort. And I'd also like to thank the many community leaders that have been working around the clock to protect their communities. So as my colleagues have said, we'll be there with community members and those affected as they return to their communities and begin that hard work of assessment and rebuilding. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, Minister Boissonnault now.
Well, thanks very much, Minister Haidu. Bonjour à tous et merci d'être
Hello to
parmi nous
everyone,
aujourd'hui.
and thank
I want to
you for
acknowledge
being
that I
with
am
us today.
joining you from Treaty 6 territory today. Thank you to all of my colleagues for their presentations. I'm able to provide a brief update today about the employment insurance and other supports available for individuals affected by wildfires across Canada. I would like to start by expressing my deepest thanks to the firefighters and local authorities, to those staying behind to support firefighters, and to all of the volunteers helping the evacuees. Each of you have stepped up to support your fellow Canadians and have shown great resolve and resiliency in the tasks that you face on a daily basis, and difficult tasks at that, and a challenging situation. To those individuals who've been evacuated, please know that your federal government is making every effort to ensure that you receive the services and the benefits to which you're entitled. So now, as many people may be aware, the department that I'm responsible for, ESDC, has procedures in place so it can continue to deliver services in emergency situations. And although Service Canada centers in Yellowknife, Fort Smith, and Hay River may be closed temporarily due to evacuations, we are responding as circumstances evolve through our national and regional emergency operation centers. Service Canada va à la rencontre des communautés touchées, y compris les communautés autochtones, en mettant en place des unités de services mobiles dans les centres d'évacuation du pays, afin que tous ceux qui ont besoin d'aide de recevoir leur présentation puissent l'obtenir. Les personnes qui ne peuvent pas accéder aux services régulés en personne peuvent obtenir de l'aide auprès des employés de Service Canada par l'intermédiaire du centre d'appui des services mobiles. Le numéro de téléphone sans frais est le 1-877-631-2657. The toll-free number for supports from our department is 1-877-631-2657. Des renseignements sur l'aide du Service Canada aux personnes touchées par les feux de forêt sont aussi disponibles en ligne à l'adresse suivante, canada.ca/feux de forêt. Pour ceux qui n'ont pas accès à l'Internet ou aux services en personne, le centre d'appui des services mobiles est ouvert du lundi au vendredi de 7h à 19h, heure avancée de l'Est. Depuis le 26 août, le service est disponible durant la fin de la semaine aussi. Et en dehors des heures régulières, vous pouvez aussi laisser un message et recevoir un appel la journée ouvrable suivante. If you've been affected by wildfires, I strongly encourage you to apply for EI benefits as soon as possible, even if you don't have your record of employment. Applications will be prioritized based on the postal code of affected areas and processed as soon as possible. Between April 29th and the beginning of this week, Service Canada received 14,078 new applications from claimants who live in postal codes where an evacuation order has been imposed. And because of the delivery of physical checks by mail may be affected, I strongly encourage you to sign up for direct deposit so that you can receive your benefits sooner. Dans les cas où les personnes évacuées
In
ont
cases in
besoin d'un
which
passeport de toute
evacuees
urgence,
need an
Service
urgent
Canada explore
passport,
toutes les options possibles
Service Canada is
pour que le
exploring
passeport
all
soit émis
possible
dans les meilleurs délais.
options so that the
De plus,
passports
nous
can be
aidons dans les
delivered
situations où
in
un
good time.
remplacement de
In
paiement peut être
situations
nécessaire
where
si un
payment
chèque de
replacements
prestation a
are
été oublié dans un
required
lieu
if
évacué.
a
Service
check was
Canada's
left in an evacuated
experienced officials can help
area.
you access the benefits you need and help you navigate the extraordinary challenges you're facing. So, for example, if you need a passport, we're working diligently to make sure we take all steps possible to make sure that you're able to get your passport in these exceptional times. Support is there. Please do not hesitate to reach out if you need assistance. Et juste pour réitérer les commentaires de
I'd
mon
like to
collègue ministre
reiterate
Sargent
what my
a dit, a
colleague,
prononcé
Minister
à l'heure
Sargent, said
actuelle,
earlier.
1052 incendies de forêt brûlent, dont
52 wildfires are burning.
791
In
sont déclarés hors de contrôle.
791
Il
of
y a
them
eu
are out of control. There have been
6,74
6,174
incendies de forêt à l'échelle nationale et environ 16,5 millions d'hectares de notre beau
and they
pays
affect
ont
5
brûlé.
million hectares of
Plus
our
de
beautiful country.
57 000
Over
personnes restent
57,000
évacuées, s'y
people
inclut
are
les gens évacués du
evacuated,
territoire du
including
Nord-Ouest.
people who have been
Aux personnes
evacuated
touchées
from
par
the
les
Northwest
incendies,
Territories. To
sachez
those of you
que
who
nous
have been
sommes à
affected
vos
by
côtés.
the wildfires, please
Nous
know that we are with
continuons de
you.
mobiliser
We
des
continue
ressources à travers le
to
pays
mobilize
et nous
resources
serons
throughout the
là
country,
tout au
and
long
we will
de la
be
reprise
with
et de la
you
reconstruction.
throughout
Le
the
25
rebuilding
août,
process.
le gouvernement du Canada
On
a approuvé une
August
demande d'aide
25th,
fédérale du gouvernement de la Colombie-Britannique pour fournir des ressources
the government
supplémentaires de lutte contre les
accepted
incendies.
a request
Cela
to
s'ajoute au
provide
soutien
additional
fédéral déjà
support
fourni
for people
dans le
touched by
cadre de la
wildfires. This is in
demande du
addition to
19
those
août.
who
De plus, le 12 août, le
requested
gouvernement du Canada
assistance
a approuvé
August
une demande
19th.
d'aide fédérale du gouvernement des territoires
On
du Nord-Ouest.
August
Et bien sûr,
12th,
les forces armées
we
canadiennes ont
accepted
déployé de
a
nombreuses
request for support.
ressources. Le centre d'entraînement des cadets Vernon a été
The Vernon
mis
Cadet
à la
Center has
disposition
been
des
put
autorités
to the
provinciales
disposal of
et
the
environ
provincial
175
authorities,
membres
and
des forces armées
175
canadiennes
members
sont
of the
actuellement déployés en
of CAF
Colombie-Britannique
are
pour
deployed
soutenir
in
les efforts de
BC
lutte
to
contre les
support
incendies
the
dans les régions de
wildfire
Vanderhoof
fight
et de
effort
Mackenzie.
in Vanderhoof
Dans
and
les
Mackenzie
territoires du
areas.
Nord-Ouest,
In
l'aide des
Northwest
forces armées
Territories,
canadiennes comprenait 350 membres déployés ainsi qu'un soutien
350
aérien
members have been
et un
deployed,
soutien local des
including
Rangers.
air support and
La
local
force
support from the
opérationnelle
Rangers.
aérienne a contribué à l'évacuation
They
d'environ
contributed to the
430 personnes et
evacuation
membres
of
du
about
personnel,
430
tandis que la force
people and members
opérationnelle
of
terrestre
staff
a
members.
participé aux tâches
And
de lutte
land
contre les incendies de type 3 à
and
Yellowknife
the
et
Land
à
Task
Hay
Force
River
assisted
et
with
dans les environs.
firefighting in
L'armée
Yellowknife
a
and Hay
également
River.
joué un rôle
The
crucial
military was
en
also
soutenant les
crucial in
responsables
supporting
territoriaux dans la
territorial
planification
officials
et
with
la
planning
coordination
and
de cette
coordinating this
évacuation sans
unprecedented
précédent.
evacuation.
Nous avons adopté une approche pan-gouvernementale pour
We had a
garantir que toutes les
pan-governmental
ressources
approach to make
nécessaires
sure that all
sont
of the
mises à
resources
la
necessary
disposition.
were
En
made available.
conclusion, j'aimerais
In
m'adresser
conclusion,
directement
I'd like
aux
to address
pompiers,
myself
aux membres des forces armées
directly
canadiennes,
to the
aux pompiers
firefighters,
venus
the
du monde
members
entier
of
et au
Canadian Armed
personnel du sol,
Forces, and the
des
Land
services de
Task
gestion des
Services, and
urgences qui
the
sont en première
emergency
ligne
management
de cette crise
managers
climatique,
who
qui
are in the
protègent leur
first
propre
lines of
communauté.
this climate
Merci
crisis that
pour
are
votre
protecting
service.
our
Et je veux
communities.
également
Thank you for
prendre
your
un moment pour
services.
remercier
I'd also like to take a moment
d'Australie,
to
du Brésil,
thank
du
you
Chili,
for
du Costa Rica,
Australia,
de l'Union
Costa Rica,
européenne,
Chile,
de
the
France, de Mexique,
the
de
European Union,
Nouvelle-Zélande,
France,
du Portugal,
Mexico,
d'Afrique
New
du Sud,
Zealand,
de Corée du
South
Sud et
Africa,
des États-Unis.
South Korea, and the
Merci
United
beaucoup.
States.
Je vais
Thank
maintenant
you so
céder
much.
la parole
I
au
would
ministre
like
Bénard.
now to give the floor to Minister Vidal.
Bonjour tout le monde. Good afternoon, everyone. Je voudrais d'abord commencer par faire
I
un
would like
petit
to
survol
begin by
en
giving
français
a brief
de ce
overview
que
in
ma
French
collègue,
of what
la
my
ministre
colleague,
Haïdou,
Minister
a dit au
Haïdou,
sujet des services autochtones
said
pendant
regarding
cette
Indigenous
saison
Services
record
Canada
des feux de
throughout
forêt.
this record wildfire
25
season.
Premières Nations vivant sur les réserves ont
25
actuellement
First
touché,
Nations living on reserves are
actuellement
currently
touchés par
affected
des
by
feux
forest
de forêt.
fires.
9 Premières Nations
9
vivant dans les réserves sont actuellement
On
évacuées
reserve First Nations are currently
et
evacuated.
environ 26 500 membres des Premières
Approximately
Nations vivant sur les
26,500
réserves ont
on
été
reserve First
évacués
Nations people have been
de leur chez eux
evacuated from
cette
their
année.
homes this year.
Et 93 communautés des
93
Premières
First
Nations ont
Nations
été
communities were
évacuées cette année.
evacuated this year.
Plus de 113
Over
millions de dollars ont été
$113
versés
million
dans le cadre
have been
du programme
provided
d'aide à la
through
gestion
the
des
ISC's
urgences
Emergency Management
des
Assistance
services aux
Program
Autochtones pour
to
soutenir
directly
directement
support
des
First
Premières
Nations
Nations et
and
d'autres
other eligible
communautés
communities
admissibles
affected by
touchées par les feux de forêt
wildfires to
afin
help
de
them
leur
meet
aider
their
à
immediate
répondre à leurs
needs.
besoins immédiats. This year's wildfire season in Canada has truly been unprecedented. and this is especially true in the Northwest Territories. For months, first responders and members of the Canadian Armed Forces have been on the front line protecting residents and their communities, and for that, we thank them. Last week, I had the chance to speak to evacuees from Northwest Territories who were in Edmonton. They were in good spirits, but understandably very eager to get back home. Thankfully for residents of Yellowknife and the surrounding area, it is now safe enough to go home, but that is still not the case for other communities. The federal government will continue to be there in any capacity we can to suppress the fires and to support residents who are away from home. Northerners have been seeing some of the most devastating effects of climate change, including a longer and more active wildfire season. With the North warming up to 3 times the speed as the rest of Canada, we must act now to slow the rate of warming and help communities adapt to the climate that is constantly changing around them. The large infrastructure gap exists in the region, and our government has made record investments towards filling them. This year's record wildfire season in the Northwest Territories has underlined the chronic underfunding of infrastructure in the territories by previous governments of all stripes. While our focus right now is on assisting the territory face their immediate crisis, we remain committed to working with our territorial partners in addressing these infrastructure gaps in the long term. I want to end by thanking Northerners for their resiliency and their patience, and I want to specifically thank Premier Cochrane for her leadership during these trying times. And I will now hand it over to Michael McLeod, the MP for the Northwest Territories, who has been working tirelessly to help his constituents over the summer.
Thank you, Minister Vandal, and good day, everyone. I'm joining you from my home in Fort Providence, which is approximately 300 kilometers southwest of Yellowknife. And as we speak, and over the next few days, thousands of Yellowknifers and other North Slave residents will be stopping by our community's Big River Service Center to fuel up before returning home. And many others will be flying back from the various cities that have hosted them for the past weeks. There is certainly a great deal of relief being felt by the NBTers as more than 20,000 residents of Yellowknife, Delo, Detta, and the Ingram Trail are coming back to their communities. This reflects about half of the Northwest Territories' total population moving back to the North Slave region roughly 3 weeks after the evacuation order was made by the government of the Northwest Territories. However, we know that for residents in the South Slave communities, returning home is not an option yet, as the fires in this region continue to be out of control, and firefighting efforts continue in this region, and they're working very hard to ensure residents can return when it's safe to do so. And I have to say that words cannot express how grateful Northerners are to the people who have been working to assist our territory during this very difficult time, this very difficult fire season, and the support from the Canadian Armed Forces and from firefighters across Canada that came to our region to support our local firefighters have been critically important. As has the assistance provided by CAF on logistics to the territory's emergency management organization. Minister Wilkinson announced today of increased funding for the Northwest Territories for wildlife firefighting equipment and essential personnel is very welcome news, especially seeing what we've been up against over this past wildfire season. And we also want to thank those communities, primarily in Alberta, but in other provinces and territories that have opened their doors to NBTers over the recent weeks. Your kindness, your generosity will not be forgotten by our territory. As we enter this portion of the NBT's fire season, it is critical that all levels of government continue to work together to ensure local residences and small businesses are able to recover, and that we can rebuild a healthy and safe return for all Northerners. Thank you. Merci Cho.
Thank you. We'll now start the question period. Nous allons maintenant commencer la période de
We will
questions.
now start the
As
question
a reminder,
period.
one question, one follow-up. We'll start in the room with Fraser from APDN.
This is for Minister Haidu. Of course, with the evacuations, particularly in the Northwest Territories, the Indigenous communities have sustained a lot of costs. Can you just outline some of the immediate supports, I guess, for individuals that have run up gas bills, I guess, or lodging, or many just immediate sort of bills because of the evacuation?
Well, thanks for the question. And those are exactly the kinds of concerns that leaders have spoken about, both from a cash flow perspective and also just from an accumulation of cost perspective. I've reiterated to the leaders of the Northwest Territories that costs will be supported, and we're working through that with the territory as we speak about who will pay for what. But my main message to leaders is that we will not leave people behind, and that we will make sure that people are supported with all eligible costs covered through a collaboration between the federal government and the territorial government. I will say the kinds of things we've been supporting First Nations with in terms of costs and even practical coordination. I listed some of them in my remarks, things like accommodations, that is where to stay and how to get to places as evacuees are moving around, transportation costs, access to food, nutrition, mental wellness, but even some practical things. Sometimes people leave in a pretty big hurry and things are forgotten, like assistive devices or medication or eyeglasses. There are many, many things that people need that get left behind in the rush of evacuation. And so we work with each community leader to make sure that people get those necessary supports to continue functioning in their temporary residences.
Okay, and this follow-up is actually for Mr. Haidu, but it's a separate event. There's a press conference going on today later at the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs in Winnipeg, and it's to address healthcare disparities between First Nations and non-Indigenous communities, and in particular the Picamac Cree Nation. Just want to know if you have anything to say about some of those issues that are going on in Manitoba.
Well, first of all, congratulations to the leaders for having a conference that talks about the significant gaps in health outcomes for Indigenous people between non-Indigenous people. We're talking about things like years of life lost and a variety of different other conditions that disproportionately affect Indigenous peoples. Clearly, we've, as a federal government, done quite a bit to try to close the gap, the social determinants of health that include things like my colleague, Minister Vandell, talked about, things like the unacceptable gaps in housing, for example, access to nutrition through Nutrition North, and a number of other inputs that help people have healthier outcomes and prevent illness. But I would also say that there's an important conversation happening about health equity and access to health care across the country. And as ministers have been renegotiating the federal health transfers or negotiating the federal health transfers, in fact, I've been at many of those conversations, as well as Indigenous partners in each of the provinces and territories, to talk about closing the gap to access and care. And the federal government, as you know, convened a summit on racism in healthcare, on the poor outcomes for Indigenous people in healthcare systems that are provincially and territorially run, and who have the majority of responsibility for providing those services. It's why the Prime Minister announced a $2 billion health equity fund to support First Nations leaders, including those in Manitoba, to take on projects that will help reduce those gaps in care. And so it's really twofold. It's how the work that we're doing on supporting First Nations to have healthier outcomes and lifestyles that include access to some of the things many Canadians take for granted, as well as making sure that our healthcare systems are meeting the needs of all people, no matter where you live in this country.
Thank you. Next question, Tanya, CBC.
Thank you. I'll leave it open to whomever wants to address this question. But yesterday, BC's emergency preparedness minister had the strongest language yet on the drought conditions there. She called it a sleeping giant of a natural disaster. Ranchers can't grow their own hay because of the drought and wildfires burning the pastures. It means there's no feed for livestock. I know earlier in the season, the province requested federal help in the form of an agri-recovery program for ranchers. They've also been working to secure more feed for livestock through the Access to Feed program. I'm wondering what the status is of those programs, and if they haven't yet been approved or delivered on, why is it taken so long given that help is needed right now?
I have spoken to Minister Ma about those concerns. In fact, actually, when we look at the impact of climate change, is having a significant impact on droughts. And in fact, actually, just 2 days ago, I was in Sechelt, where they actually had the emergency for water. So we were talking about that, but a lot of this work is going to take place when it comes to the jurisdiction side of where the new reservoirs need to go. It's a lot of work that needs to be done in that case. But as I told Minister Ma, we look forward to working with her to look at what type of plans that need to come at the municipal level and at the provincial level. Then we'll work together in terms of what type of support needs to be provided. But what I can say is anytime there has been a disaster, and sadly in BC, there's been either floods with the atmospheric river and wildfires now, not only this year, but back in 2017. The disaster financial assistance arrangement, the BC government has been utilizing that extremely well, where up to 90% of the cost the federal government covers. So we'll work together on dealing with some of these things, but also looking at the mitigation and the adaptation work. So that's an area that we will work together on this. The wider drought issue, I think, is going to have to take a look at a much wider issue when it comes to what type of new systems are going to be needed in place, what type of disaster that might also fall, and what type of consultations will be needed at the municipal level to make sure that the appropriate water systems are in place.
And a follow-up, it's an unrelated question for my colleagues regarding today's developments with the foreign interference inquiry. I'll invite any of you to weigh in. How important was calling this inquiry so your government can move past this issue and refocus on your other priorities? Have Canadians raised this issue with you over the summer, and has it hurt public faith or trust in your government?
I can start. I think, go ahead, Patty.
Go ahead, Randy.
Look, I think we've been very clear on this issue that defending Canadians against foreign interference is something that our government takes extremely seriously, that we've been working on since 2015. And the fact that we've got agreement now from all the leaders and are proceeding with the inquiry demonstrates that we're serious about this. And we want to make sure that as a government, we're addressing all of the facets of this. We have faith and confidence in what our security establishment is doing, and look forward to the report that will come out in February. And to your point, have I heard about this summer? Not on the doors that I've been doing in Edmonton Centre.
I would just add that I just yesterday gave a speech to the Thunder Bay Chamber of Commerce and talked about Indigenous economic reconciliation, among a number of other things, including the critical mineral strategy, and took questions from the audience, and they were all about issues that matter to Canadians that I've been hearing about this summer. Things like the opportunity for the North to grow its economy, the challenges that people are having in the post-COVID recovery, economic recovery, and what we can all do to accelerate things like ensuring more affordable housing. So those are the things that are on the minds of at least the Thunder Bay Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you. Next question, Leon from Canadian Press.
Hi there. My question is for Minister Sajjan. It's just about, is there a federal firefighting agency in future plans? And if not, what is holding back the government from forming one?
It's a really good question. What we need to take a look at is what type of resources are needed. And I've said this quite clearly as I've been talking to various community leaders, mayors in BC and across the country. When it comes to emergency preparedness, and I want to take you back to early on when we formed the government, we knew that climate change was having a significant impact on our country. That's why very early on, even in our defense policy, we actually did consultations in Yellowknife on this topic from a defense perspective, to making sure that the Canadian Armed Forces could respond. And we've seen this actually the action take place just recently in this current disaster. So what we've been doing is analyzing the changes that have been taking place, and we've seen the frequency that, whether it's from floods or from wildfires, putting the right resources in. And now, because of the increased frequency of this, we need to make sure that the right resource, the right level is can provide the right support. So at the federal level, yes, we are looking at many different options right now. What it looks like, don't have an answer for you yet. Minister Blair has done some amazing work on this, and I'll take the mantle and move things forward. We will be talking to many other countries on how their system works, whether it's systems in the U.S., the U.K., Japan. But what we need in Canada, it's too easy to say, hey, we have a system that works in another country that's going to work here. We need to make sure that we have a catered response to Canadians. The regions in Canada are very unique, especially we've seen in the Northwest Territories, but even within, if you look at the Atlantic coast and the provinces, we have to be ready to be able to respond. So what we're looking at wildfires, yes, but we also need to look at floods. We also need to be ready for the potential earthquakes. So we're looking at all different types of disasters, doing the lessons learned, and then we'll come up with the appropriate response. But I would say that all options are currently on the table, but we don't have an answer just yet.
Thank you. And my follow-up is just about, can you outline what the government is doing for Canadians who have lost homes or other items in the wildfires? How are you helping them recover that?
No, and I want to make sure that we answer this question and Canadians hear this, because and as Canadians today are going back and visiting some of their properties that have been destroyed, and I have friends who have lost their homes as well. So the disaster financial assistance arrangement at the federal level works with the provinces. So the provinces decide what type of support is going to be needed, and the federal government covers up to 90% of those costs. And in British Columbia alone, like I said, sadly, the province has already been too used to this type of work. And what we try to do is move the money very quickly, and we'll make even advanced payments. So for when it comes to the atmospheric river, the support that went into Lytton, and our folks our officials are already working with the Northwest Territories and with BC on this type of support.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is all the time we had today for the press conference. Merci, le ministre. C'était tout le temps que nous avons aujourd'hui.